Today, we're back working on the N-scale model railroad, and we're adding a pond and a stream. First things first, let's get the tracks and the bridges that are in the stream area out of the way. As you can see, I used a Sharpie to draw out the basic outline of where I wanted the pond and the stream to be. Now, I did have this planned out when I originally drew up my layout, but like most things I do, I thought of a way to do this that probably isn't traditional, and I didn't build it in from the beginning. I just figured once I got the foam down and I got the tracks down and I got some buildings in place, I could just cut out the foam and not have to build it in place. Which is a good thing because I have shifted some of the tracks around as I finish the main buildings and industries. So I may have had spots where I couldn't put things where I kind of like them as they are now. The bad part of this decision, though, is I thought it would be really easy to carve and remove the foam. I forgot that I wood glued the entire 2 sheets together everywhere. I should have put a lot less glue at this end of the layout, or cut the top layer of foam into shape before I started and dealt with the not being able to add some tracks and shapes. Anyhow, using a single-use breakaway blade utility-style knife, I started cutting the basic shapes. My original idea, like I stated earlier, was to cut some relief cuts from edge to edge of the outline and just lift out a section at a time. But quickly, it became apparent that this was not going to happen. So I took to hacking the foam into little blocks and using a flathead screwdriver and my fingers to remove the foam. It just made a huge mess. I worked in small shifts, i.e., took coffee breaks, got off my feet for a little bit, and then just slowly dug out the unnecessary bits of foam until I had the rough shapes of what I wanted. While pulling up the foam, I did notice that one section jutting out to the middle of what I was going to use as a pond area, and I decided to leave it in place. It could be an extra place to add scenery and maybe some folks enjoying the pond. Next up was to fit bridge abutments. I used the retaining walls from the plaster tunnel entrances from the Woodland Scenics kits I had left over from when I did the tunnels. See the video link here. I haven't done the longer truss bridge abutments or the full cutout as I'm still in that planning extra mainline trackage. May end up just adding it being an illusionary track connection to a bigger railroad, or I may add in a loop on the western side of the layout just to run passenger trains around and around and around and around. But that's for a later date and another video. On the western side, I used 3 sections, 2 acting as winged retaining walls, and on the eastern side of the bridge, I just used 1. I will build up the rocks or earth around the abutments later on in the build. Now comes the first bit of shaping for the final pond and stream, plaster cloth. I pre-cut some 2-inch wide strips from the plaster cloth. I used these to line the circular shape of the pond. Using thinner, narrower strips allowed me to keep the shape closer to that bowl-like shape that I had carved earlier. I then continued running the strips down where the stream would be and a little bit up onto the flats just to line the stream and give it some shape and some texture. But I'm leaving the flats in place, just bare foam, figuring they might become service roads that the railroad used to maintain the bridges or maybe originally put them in. I don't know. It just gives me options. I didn't bring much of the plaster cloth up onto the riverbank section or to the rolling grounds, as I still needed to figure out what I wanted to do with that area. To set the plaster abutments in place, I just buttered the back side with some drywall compound, and then I pushed the cut down retaining walls into the foam trench that I had carved previously. Once all that plaster cloth was hardened and dried, I like to put Sculptamold over the top, as it provides a better coverage and is sculptable and looks more organic. It takes inks and paints and stains very well, unlike the plaster cloth that tends to have lots of little holes in it. Time to add some color to all that white plaster. When it comes to painting, I started with the bridge abutments and used a combination of black and blue ink to stain the plaster. I'll come back later and tie it all together with a light dry brush. I moved back to the pond while the inks dried, mixing up brown and dark yellow inks, and started with the areas that I figured would be mostly covered with dirt or grass. And then I worked up to browns and ochres and sepias for the parts that I wanted to be earth or dirt or land. Black, sepia, gray inks, and acrylics were used to get the rock colors kind of close to where I wanted them. Using various color combinations of blues and greens and a little black, I started to work on the deepest parts of the water features. Like I said when I was doing the bridge abutments, I came back in with a light gray dry brushing of acrylic just to tie all the scenes together and kind of give them some sort of connectivity. Now, I will say that I hand painted a lot of this, but I did come back with my airbrush and run a little bit of inks and acrylic colors to get a nice smoother transition. You can kind of see in the final picture how much better it looks. Well, that's it for this part of the build. Join me next time when I add some ground effects like dirt and grass and maybe some trees or something like that. And if the weather holds out, maybe we can even start pouring that base layer of the pond I talked about. And until next time, happy hobbying, enjoy your model railroad.